Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, and as Malcolm used to say, friends and enemies, it is White Ill, the Catawba Valley Aboriginal. Today is Wednesday, October 6th, 2019, or as we like to say, the 400th anniversary of our imaginary arrival in America from the hold of a Portuguese man of war that landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Notice I said imaginary. If you look at me, if you listen to my voice, you'll probably detect that I am a black man originated from the South or the southeastern part of the United States. That if a cop showed up on my porch and made a police report about the encounter, he would probably describe me as an African American. And the truth is that I may be American in the sense that this land was named after the plumed serpent, Amaru. And that land is called Amaruka. So you could argue that I may be American, but you can't make the argument that I am African. Even though some of you have commented I have a bell-shaped nose, or bell pepper-shaped nose, or whatever that means. The fact of the matter is that when you actually do the research, you'll find that there were indeed millions of Africans enslaved in Africa, sent over the choppiest ocean in the world, the Atlantic Ocean, to a land just recently discovered by Europeans. How you discover a land that has millions of occupants, I'm not sure, but to them it was new information, so they say they discovered it. And that is the source of my lineage in America, the transatlantic slave trade. I've actually done the reading. I've actually done the research. And my conclusion is I'm laughing because I know you're going to trip. But my conclusion is that the black man in America, the foundational black American anyway, I'm not talking about Africans, the African immigrants, or Caribbean immigrants. I'm talking about the ethnic group that was created in the ethnogenetic moment of the passage of the 14th Amendment in 1865. The ratification of that amendment in 1865, in December of that year, meant that 4 million people, most born in the United States of America, of whom 90% or so were slaves, were for the most part only 5% African and 95% other, that other being mostly Aboriginal American. In fact, the black man in America may be more white than African. Don't trip, even I have white ancestors, as dark as I am. I'm going to give you a parable, and then I'm going to give you some numbers. And I'm going to use the parable to help you make sense of the numbers I'm getting ready to throw at you. Okay? To preface, I've been a supporter of the ADOS movement, the foundational Black American movement, the movement to identify us as we should have identified all along. There was a time when people who looked like us would come among us and become part of us. But now there is a movement to hijack our identity and submerge it into the identity called people of color, minority, uh, African American. And by doing so, what we do is relinquish our ability to dictate our own destiny in terms of law, public policy, and the judicial system, legislation. It hijacks our our ongoing attempt since 1865 to recover the fruits of our and our ancestors' labor in building this nation. You call it reparations, you call it what you want to, just cut the check. Because there's a generational wealth gap among our people that is directly related to our status as that ethnic group that was created in 1865 and the subsequent public policy, legislation, judicial activism that has caused us injury and harm in terms of wealth and security and prosperity in America as a group. So let me start this. This parable thusly. If you've been to church, you learn about Jesus. You know he taught in parables to make it easier to understand. The parable may not be true factually, but it was true intrinsically. You know it's true. Okay. A certain man passed away that owned property. He owned not only an island in the Caribbean, but he owned property on the mainland of the continent. He owned an island and he owned property on the continent. Now, his son inherited the land, and the son and his wife decided to become ranchers. Okay? So they decided to turn the island into one big ranch and turn the portion of property he had inherited on the continent into another ranch. And his preference for cattle was Black Angus cattle. So he runs a ranch with cattle that he imports. They breed other cattle. Some get sold, some die, whatever. But the sum total of all the cattle on this island, because the island has no cattle before he gets there, the sum total of the cattle on that island come from those Black Angus cows and their descendants. All right? 2 generations later, the original man's grandson decides to sell out. So in order to sell out, he decides to sell all the cattle on the island. So he goes around and counts every head of cattle. He researches all these purchase receipts and finds out that over the course of time, they have imported 1,000 original head of cattle from this place, say in Argentina. Black Angus cattle. That's all the cattle he has, Black Angus. And when he does a head count, he finds that the remnant of those 1,000 Black Angus cattle totals to be 500,000. 500. So he's got 500 head of cattle left. All right? Simultaneously, his cousin, who inherited the land on the continent, is also running a cattle operation. He specializes or likes to bring over Black Angus cattle. However, he also takes in cattle that he finds in wild herds around his ranch. You've seen those cowboy movies where they go out and herd up these wild herds of cattle and come back and brand them and all that good stuff to make them theirs. Okay? So 3 years after the original, first cousin sells out his 500 head of cattle. Cousin on the continent says, hey, calls him up, says, hey, cuz, I'm about to go out of business like you did. I want to sell my cattle. How did you go about doing it? He said, well, I just called up this company, this transport company, told them how many cattle I had, and they sent enough ships or trucks or whatever to take care of them, take them to the stockyard, break me off, blah, blah, blah. So the cousin says, well, that sounds like a plan, but, I'm not there at the ranch. I don't know how to get a good count. The first cousin says, well, look, I checked my records. We imported 1,000 head of cattle, and we had 500 when I decided to sell out. So, logically speaking, you could take whatever cattle that you imported and say half of that is going to be your remainder. Since you've been importing Black Angus cattle from the same place I've been importing Black Angus cattle. So your percentages should be the same. So cousin says, that's a good idea. So he goes through his receipts. He finds out that ranch on the continent has imported 200 head of cattle. So he says, okay, calls up the transport company, says, I need enough vehicles to transport 100 head of cattle. That's 50% of the 200. I need to be able to transport 100 head of cattle to the stockyard, to the slaughterhouse, wherever he's taking them. And on the morning that the people arrived there to take his cattle away, the man that is in charge of loading the cattle calls him up and says, boss, we got a problem. What's the problem? Well, we brought enough transport for 100 head of cattle. But we did a count, and there's 2,000 head of cattle here. What do you want us to do? So eventually they get it worked out, and the second cousin calls the first cousin and says, hey, man, he said, you told me to only arrange for 100 head of cattle based on the receipts for this Black Angus. He said when the man got there, he said there was almost 2,000 head of cattle. So how could we have been so wrong? First cousin says it's pretty obvious what the deal is. He said we got cattle from the same place. They came over the same voyage. They lived in the same conditions, ate the same food, and we pretty much ran the operations the same way. So the obvious answer is that those 2,000 head of cattle, most of them didn't come from anywhere. Most of them were already there. The point I'm trying to make is there is a population of African people in the Caribbean that came over from the same locations in Africa. They came over the same journey over the ocean. They were placed into the same conditions when they got to the Caribbean as they were when they got to the United States of America. As people say, they just got off the boat earlier than our ancestors. But the total impact on their population was 50% of the people imported to that island. That island is called Haiti. The continent, we call that the United States of America. In 1804, after 200 plus years of importing 1 million slaves from Africa, the Haitian population in 1804 was 500,000. And that signaled the end of the importation of Africans due to the success of the Haitian Revolution. 3 years later, in 1807, the United States of America, in response to the Haitian Revolution, the fear of the African stirring up dissent, and continuing to initiate insurgencies and insurrections on slave plantations, they outlawed the importation of Africans to the United States of America. The Congress did in 1807, just 3 years after the Haitian Revolution. 3 years later, there was a census in the United States of America. Also, that same year, Emory University has compiled numbers by researching manifests, bills of sale, bills of lading, courthouse records, auction records, all this kind of thing. And they have come to the conclusion that from 1600 to 1810, not quite 200,000 Africans were imported to the United States of America. 200,000, 1/5 of what went to Haiti. The population of the black man in America in 1810 was 2 million. Based on the Haitian experience, you would project 100,000 survivors, or the remnant of 200,000 Africans imported to the United States of America would have been 100,000. Instead, the population was 2 million. So the question an inquiring mind should ask is, where did those extra 1.9 million people come from? The answer is, they didn't come from anywhere. They were already here. You see, that fictional time of 1619 is 94 years after, for example, the year 1524. What happened in 1524? Giovanni Verrazano, the man for whom the Verrazano Bridge in New York City is named, made an expedition on behalf of the commission of King Francis I of France to explore the east coast of the United States of America, or North America. And one of his first stops, he landed in what is today North Carolina, in the Cape Fear River. He sent men ashore, and then came ashore himself, and the first inhabitants of the land that he met were people he described as dark as Ethiopians, or dark not unlike Ethiopians, which is the same thing. And we all know Ethiopian is code word for black. So he met black people literally waving at him from the shore when he arrived to the United States of America. And then you want to tell me that all the black people in the United States of America just suddenly popped up 94 years later, and those that don't comply with the narrative, they just don't count. The oldest skeletal remains in the United States of America, in North America and South America, have been carbon dated to 12,000 years ago. Both skeletal remains were labeled by anthropologists as Negroid, which is black, 12,000 years ago. That's about the time these Mongoloids came over the Bering Strait. Now, I don't want to get into a discussion today about the fallacies of the DNA test, but let's just say that it is strange that we have skeletal proof or skeletal remains that the Negro has been in America for 12,000 years, not 400 years, but 12,000 years. But when we say that we have Aboriginal roots, when we repeat our oral tradition from our fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, people who knew, people who loved you, who had no interest in lying to you, or no reason to lie to you, that we have Indian or Aboriginal roots. You want to call us liars. You want to say that those people are liars. You want us to believe that they are lying to you, but not your open enemy. When given the choice between the propaganda that your open enemy tries to indoctrinate you to, and the oral tradition of the people who love you, from whose loins you sprang, you choose your open enemy. Isn't it worth an examination of the facts? Anyway, based on the fact that the original population of chattel slaves was Native or Indian, based on the fact that history of warfare with the Native Aboriginals almost always concluded with Aboriginal populations who lost being put into slavery. Being that the United States and the colonies that preceded it fought dozens of wars with Aboriginals, and not only that, but the colonies financed dozens of wars between Aboriginals with weapons to be repaid by with captives from the other tribes. Should tell you there was a thriving Indian chattel slave population before the Africans began to be imported. Not only that, if you look at things like John Norris's book in 1720, which set the ideal plantation in South Carolina, which should be manned by 15 good Negroes at 45 pounds each to work the fields, 15 Indian women at 18 pounds each to work the fields, plus another 3 Indian women to cook and clean at 55 pounds, a total of 1,000 pounds, British pounds sterling, to purchase 33 souls to make one rich. If you notice, the optimal plantation had more Indians than Negroes. Assuming Negro, that's assuming Negro means African, which I don't, but others do. And the fact that an African man costs 2.5 times as much as an Indian woman indicates that there must have been a glut or an abundance of Indian women on the slave market. That's simple economics, supply and demand. Okay? The greater the supply, the lower the cost. The lower the demand, the lower the demand, the lower the cost. That's how that works. So there are a lot of historical indications that let you know that the predominant population throughout the history of chattel slavery had roots in Aboriginal tribal people, people that were here before the European got here. And that when they became enslaved, they were simply reclassified from Indian into black, Negro, colored. And their descendants were classified from Indian to black, Negro, colored. It's not hard. The indication's there. The history is there. And you may have a bone to pick with the example I use, but the Haitian population was exclusively African. The Caribs, the Tainos, the Arawaks, whoever inhabited the island of Santo Domingo had been wiped out. They never wiped out the Indian population in the United States of America. They simply enslaved those defeated Indians and called them slaves. And when they popped up on the census reports, they were people of color or colored people. So what we have here is a history called paper genocide, in which through the stroke of a pen, individuals' nationalities, ethnicities have been erased and replaced with another. That was not uncommon. It's also a fallacy to believe that the African slave trade impacted the American slave trade to the extent it did in the Caribbean and in South America, where millions and millions of enslaved Africans were imported to. That wasn't the case with the United States of America. Those numbers I gave you were through 1810. 200,000 Africans had been brought to the United States of America at the same time that 1 million Africans had been brought to Haiti. The Haitian survival rate, the remnant rate, was 50% of the importers. In the United States, it was 10 times the number. So are you trying to tell me that the African woman was 20 times more fertile in America than she was in Haiti? That's what you're trying to lead me to believe if you're trying to tell me that our mother is an African woman. The example I gave you of the Negro men and the Indian women, you notice there's two demographics that aren't there. There are no Indian men and no African women. They weren't in supply or demand. Indian men weren't in demand because they would walk off and leave the plantation whenever they got ready. African women weren't in demand, one, because there weren't that many of them, and that's probably why 3 out of 4 Africans brought to the so-called New World were men and not women. 3 out of 4 were men, 1 out of 4 were women. Because I believe that something happened. I'm speculating. I admit I'm speculating. But you can't tell me that months and weeks spent in the bottom of a slave ship stewing in your own juices, as it were, in your own filth, no medical attention, no herbal remedies, breathing in miasma, foul air, bacteria, fungi, mold, viruses from the Europeans. You can't tell me that didn't have a negative impact or couldn't have a negative impact on a woman's reproductive system. Ask a woman if she thinks that may have impacted someone's system, maybe their ability to reproduce or to reproduce healthy children anyway. I mean, the fact is there that the African women who came to Haiti were only able to double their number. 250,000 women total came into Haiti. And the net result of their efforts was a population of 500,000 after 200 years of chattel slavery. In America, you would assume those African women, those 50,000, 1/4 of 200,000, would have yielded the same 100,000 population. Where did the risk come from? They were already here. So with the risk, I'm trying to repeat myself, and I've been here long enough, but I hope you've gotten something from this little demonstration. Please feel free to look up my numbers, critique, sharpen it up. The actual number for the Haitian population, by the way, was 457,000, 453,000. I added in another 40,000 to take care of casualties, to offset casualties during the Haitian Revolution. It's not as if we didn't have casualties in America, but we just didn't have a full-blown revolution where we were kicking Napoleon's army's asses and kicking the Spanish ass and fighting the British to a draw. Hats off to Haiti. Haiti's the true revolutionaries in North America. I would love to be a descendant of Haiti. I would brag about that shit. I wear Dessalines t-shirts every day. But I'm not, so I'm not trying to take that shine for myself. We have plenty to be proud of. Pan-Africanist told me, one time, no, brother, you're not descended from slavery. You're descended from African kings and queens. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. The numbers don't lie. African kings and queens, by definition, are few and far between. So the idea that we all come from African kings and queens is ludicrous. All right? Besides, those African kings and queens that sold whatever African I have in my heritage, and I don't have any record of any, but I'm not going to put it past it. But whatever Africans I had in my heritage was sold and sold out by those African kings and queens to the white man. And they didn't send, as the sister said, one boat. Not one boat came looking for us. Anyway, peace, brothers and sisters. I enjoyed talking to you this morning. I hope you get something out of it. If not, leave a comment, like, dislike, whatever. Just be engaged, be informed, and be a thinking human being. I'm out.